So everybody keeps telling me that it is winter. I am not certain that I believe this because I am fairly certain we have been in March for the last 9 months. But I did look outside my window this morning and I saw a sort of sad, dandruffy pile of snow. So I suppose that yes, technically we are in winter. So if you don't really feel like going outside and actually experiencing the winter for yourself, which I do not personally recommend, having done it this afternoon, but you still would really like to experience the winter vicariously, perhaps through fiction, I am very happy to recommend to you one of my favorite trilogies of all time, The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. You may or may not have heard of these books because a few years ago when they were released, they were relatively popular, but I personally do not believe it is possible to overrate these books. They have virtually everything you could desire in a fantasy trilogy. For example, would you like a rich setting and atmosphere that is not just your typical traipsing around merry old England without any women, because they don't exist, am I right? Then this is the book for you. The Winternight Trilogy is set in medieval Russia, or at least an alternate version of medieval Russia, and as such, it has a lot of really concrete and visceral detail about the atmosphere of the winter, the snow, the castles that noble people live in, the bugs that are in their teeth, how often they wash, but it's okay, there's not too much of that. The costumes, just about everything. And it also is heavily rooted in Russian folklore. The author was a Russian major in college and lived in Moscow for a while, extensively studied this. It does a really great job of illustrating these different kinds of mythological characters and what they might be like in a fantasy setting, such as the domovoi, which is sort of like a brownie in English folklore. It's like a household guardian who helps take care of the house as long as you leave it a few scraps of food every night. So that's really refreshing and interesting as well. Do you want compelling characters that are enjoyable to spend time with, but don't usually cross the line into outright annoyingness? Then this is the book for you. Our protagonist, Vasilisa, who usually goes by Vasya, sometimes does appear to be a very typical YA type protagonist. She's not conventionally good looking, but people seem to find her very striking looking. She's tomboyish, she can be brash at times, but she has a humanity to her in the form of her love for her family and her siblings, and also her love for her home. She has lived in the Russian countryside her entire life, and she's always been able to see these tiny magical creatures which most people cannot see on their own. So she has grown up talking to domovoi and talking to different water spirits and things like that, and so she doesn't find them terrifying. In contrast, her stepmother, Anna, can also see these creatures, but she's terrified of them. And that kind of defines like these two women's relationship to these creatures, because Vasya sees them as friends who need to be protected from people such as Father Constantine, who is an extremely charismatic and good-looking young priest who comes to the town attempting to eradicate the villagers' beliefs in these creatures in favor of Christianity. Whereas before, they had always sort of believed in both and it had been fine and nobody really minded. But Vasya sees these creatures as people, as friends and people to be protected and to be taken care of. Whereas Anna, because she's so scared of them, has never actually taken the time to speak to them. She takes refuge in religion and churches because the creatures actually cannot enter into churches. There's also lots of great dynamics with Vasya and her siblings, Vasya and her father as well. Vasya has two brothers, one of whom she's very close with. He's the next in age, next to her, and they spend a lot of their childhood together. Vasya also has another older brother named Sasha who leaves to become a warrior monk, which is pretty awesome. When she is a young child, he comes up much later in the series, in the second and third books, and it's a good example of how the series is able to successfully balance people who may have similarities, but they contrast in the way that they approach their difficulties and problems. For example, Father Constantine and Sasha are both very devout religious people, but Sasha is clearly a good person who wants to do good, and we like Sasha, whereas Father Constantine is kind of slimy and icky, and although he's a really fascinating antagonist in a lot of ways, because he's ruled by fear and just like the need to be adored constantly, we do not like him, but that doesn't really have anything to do with the fact that he is religious. It's more just because he's him. And he sucks. And it's really nice to see that close relationship between a sister and a brother, because I feel like often in literature you get sisters who are close to each other and brothers who are close to each other, but you don't get a sister and a brother who have this really close, tight-knit relationship. So I just really enjoyed seeing that. And Vazia also has another sister. She's younger. Her name is Irina. And she is Anna's daughter, and she's very beautiful, which Vazia is... We're constantly reminded, actually, that Vazia is not. And you'd think that perhaps Vazia and Irina would not get along, but they're actually very good friends, and Irina adores Vazia and looks up to her. So that's just another example of how this book can successfully flout convention. Do you want stakes that gradually increase in tangible and believable ways as the story continues? This is the book for you. So in the first book, the antagonist, aside from Father Constantine, who's really a secondary antagonist, we have the titular bear, who is the brother of Mrazko, the spirit of death and winter in Russian folklore. And Mrazko is generally, he's pretty good, I guess. He's kind of a neutral character, and he plays a much bigger role in the series as it continues, but the bear is definitely pretty bad and wants to regain the power that Mrazko took from him a long time ago, and as a result, he starts wreaking havoc among the villagers in Vazia's hometown. The beginning of the book is about that struggle between sort of the new religion and the old ways, and whether or not you can find some middle ground with that, and also about just protecting the people in this town. But then it becomes, in the next books, a much bigger struggle because it becomes about all of Russia. Vazia travels to Moscow, where her older sister is living, and gets into even more difficulties there. In the second and third books, I really appreciated how the author sort of allows Vazia to be very flawed and make mistakes, but not in such a way that you are annoyed with her. You understand her perspective, but in the first book, she has I wouldn't say that she's perfect in the first book, but she sort of has this innate ability to like figure out what's going on. And in the next books, that's sort of turned on its head because she's in a society that she doesn't understand. She doesn't know how courtly people operate. It frustrates her, and she's not very good at the machinations of court life. And that's a very interesting contrast. Do you want poetic and beautiful writing that doesn't distract or detract from the story? This is the book you want. The very first sentence of The Bear and the Nightingale goes like this. It was late winter in northern Ruse, the air sullen with wet that was neither rain nor snow. Sullen with wet? I love that so much. I can just see it. It's this wet that just hangs. The Winternight Trilogy does take place several centuries in the past. I believe 14th century Russia is the relative setting. And as a result, the speech it's not like they say thou and thee and things like that, but Katherine Arden has a way of making the speech sound a bit older while still being very accessible, and it's also very poetic, as you can hear from what I've read. But the important thing is, it doesn't get kind of earwormy and annoying. Like, it's not like everybody has to speak in rhyme and they're all like little fairies who shower fairy dust and hit people over the head with wands and things like that. That's not this kind of book. Do you want a fast-paced plot that has you turning your head left and right, desperate to turn the page and figure out what happens next? Well, in that case, maybe you don't want this book. Though the books are not slow by any means, they are definitely not fast-paced. So if what you want in a book is a thriller with a lot of wild plot twists, I don't know that I would recommend this series to you. I would recommend The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which is extremely hard to say. I've never tried to say it aloud. But I would still really, really appreciate it if you'd give them a try anyway, because they are really, really excellent books, well written, well characterized, and deal with real-world issues of Russia at that time. Also, before I go, I just really want to show you the covers of these books because they're so lovely. So this is the Bear and the Nightingale cover. It's very nice. Here's the spine. Here is the girl in the tower. Also very pretty. You can see this tower over here. Very nice. Oh, and there's a girl. Wow. It's like the person who designed this cover read the book or something. And finally, the third book in the series, The Winter of the Witch. And let me just show you them all together. Look at that. The continuity of the book covers in this series is fantastic. I am so about it. So, I hope that you have a nice winter and a nice new year, whoever may be watching this, the 10 or so subscribers that I have at this point. And of course, do not forget to check out the Winternight Trilogy. If you have read it, then let me know in the comments what you think. Have a good new year. At least better than the last one.